had a few people email me saying, oh, when I was studying nutrition in college, I had an eating disorder, and one of my mentors or a preceptor or advisor or all of the above said, like, make sure you never admit this because then people won't trust you. And I was like, what?
You're listening to the Active Mom Podcast with host Dr. Carrie Pagliano. I'm a mom, physical therapist, and your go-to guide for staying active with pelvic health issues in pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause, and beyond. Whether you're a fellow mom, physical therapist, or women's health professional, join me where I'll share expert insights, real-life stories, and the latest research to help you approach running, CrossFit, yoga, Pilates, HIIT, or whatever activity you love with confidence and evidence-informed guidance. Let's start the show. All right, welcome back to the Active Mom Podcast. The best guests, I think, are the ones that we swim in the same circles, and then we realize we probably were neighbors at some point, but we're not anymore.
Yes.
But we decide we're just going to talk about all the things. So I'm excited to invite Heather Caplan, who is a registered dietitian and also one of the co-founders, of Lane 9. And we're going to talk about what that is. And again, we've been playing in the same circles, lived in Arlington, never met Heather Caplan.
I
Welcome
know.
to the
I'm
podcast.
like, how did I not know about your practice when I definitely needed it? What was I doing?
When did you leave Arlington? That's my question.
Yeah. So we lived in North Arlington, 2017 to 2020, and I had 2 kids during that time. So
we were neighbors. We literally were neighbors. She lived the
Yeah.
neighborhood behind mine. Not sure why, how. Well, we're here now, and we're going to finally meet in person at the Female Athlete Conference. Super excited about that.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about, other than the fact that you're a former Arlingtonian, how did you become a dietitian? Kind of what's your areas of specialty? And obviously got a couple of kids. Tell us a little bit about all that. Quick smattering.
Yeah, I have 3 kids. And I became a registered dietitian because I went to Penn State and was interested in studying architecture, but I didn't get into the architecture program. They have a really competitive program. And I met with some advisors and they gave me a couple classes to take my freshman year to try to transfer into the program my sophomore year. Things were looking good on that front. And then I also kind of over the summer between graduating high school and going to college, I would say that was like the time I started developing sort of a disordered relationship with food. And I think looking back, part of that was just, it's a big life transition. I was moving across the country. I wasn't going to know anybody. I had like one person at Penn State that I knew from my high school. I went to school. I grew up in New Mexico. So like,
oh, wow.
Southwest to Northeast.
Why Penn State?
Oh, that's like another conversation.
Okay.
But,
different podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, kind of the short story is I didn't want to go to school in New Mexico because I wanted to like experience a different part of the country during college. And I just kind of had it in my head that that's what you do. And so went to visit Penn State. There was like a kind of high school connection to Penn State. And I went to we went to visit in the fall, and just like, it was this beautiful fall day. And I was like, oh my God, this campus is gorgeous. It looks like it's out of a movie and everyone seems so happy. And I'm like, oh, now that I live in the Midwest, and also like after I actually went to school there, I'm like, everyone was happy because the sun was out, and that doesn't happen very often. So,
speaking as a Western New Yorker, yes, I would agree. And we've got a lot of family in Pennsylvania. So yeah, welcome to the East Coast. We lied.
I know, we lied. It's like if you visit Seattle on a sunny day, which I have, and it's gorgeous, and you're like, nothing beats Seattle on a sunny day. Like tomorrow, like where can I live? So yeah, I went to Penn State and had some disordered eating when I got to college, which of course, like I didn't know or recognize at the time, and was kind of struggling with that huge life transition, moving across the country, not knowing anybody, kind of like adjusting to a different culture, like Southeast, Northwest, like just huge felt difference. so different.
Yeah.
And I hadn't spent any time in that part of the country. So like, I really had no reference. I think we went to DC when I was like in middle school, and DC and Pennsylvania are very different. So, so I met with an advisor, and one of the options for like a science credit was to take, a nutrition class. And I was like, yeah, sure. I don't want to take any other science. LOL. So, took a nutrition class and then took a lot of science after that, like a lot. So that was how I got into nutrition, and, took the class and was like, oh, I'm so interested in all of this stuff, because it was also like my brain's hyper fixation at the moment, and just like leaned all the way in. So studied nutrition, became an RD, struggled a little bit with the profession over the next few years, because as I sort of started to recognize that my behaviors with food were disordered, I tried to reckon that with the fact that a lot of what I learned in school was also disordered. Like if you were to see those two things side by side, I'm like, but how are they different? If this is considered healthy eating, but the way I experienced it was really disordered and unhealthy, like how do we put those two things together and like not see a problem? So I think, that's, I don't know, we can dig into that if you want, but I felt like, there is a way, of course, to eat in a way that promotes health, but, and it's not disordered, but in my experience, like what I learned and what I had like adopted as quote unquote healthy behaviors seemed very disordered and was actually leading to health problems for me. And of course, again, that's not true for everybody, but that's what was true for me. So I also during college did not have a period for 4 years and went to the doctor once a year and they were like, why aren't you having a period? I'm like, I don't know. Shouldn't you know that? Like, I don't know that. And
isn't it funny when you're like, hey, so this is what I'm learning in school. And this is what I asked the doctor and nobody knows anything. And and if you go with their route, you're going to get worse. So you're like, I either got to do something on my own or this is it. Like that very much, I'm smiling because that very much was my situation transitioning from like kind of getting back to activity after pregnancy. But there's something to be said about literally looking your own profession in the eye and being like, that ain't it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the hyperfixation on weight and like weight centric care and cut this out and, reduce intake by that. I'm like, this all is what I was doing when my health actually started declining because of all those things. And like, I wonder, again, I don't want to generalize. I don't want to say that like what works for one person is going to work for someone else. We're actually really cautious to not do that or not perpetuate that. But there was definitely some cognitive dissonance. And then I actually saw a flyer, I think my junior year, for a lab that was recruiting young menstruating college students. And it said, like, if you're not getting a period, like take one of these little tear-offs and contact our lab. And I was like,
this is
okay.
For you.
Yeah. And it's, instead of saying like, hey, I qualify for this study, which I did, I said, hey, I want to work in your lab because I wanted to learn what was going on. And I wasn't transparent about that, but I just said, I'm a dietetics student. Yeah. I'm a runner. I'm interested. I was like running for exercise and movement. I had played soccer growing up and running was like filling the void during college and worked in that lab for 2 years under Nancy Williams, who, unbeknownst to me at the time was actually like one of the first people to study amenorrhea. Worked there for 2 years. That's how I learned the term amenorrhea. Like I'd never heard that before. And was like, okay, what we're doing in this study is we're trying to increase the caloric intake of these active people who are not getting periods when they should be getting periods. And we like tracked their movement and we had all these spreadsheets of like their urine samples and blood samples and movement and caloric intake, et cetera. They came in and got, I think, resting metabolic rate tested maybe like once a month, weight, all of these different measurements. And the primary goal of that study was just to increase their caloric intake. I don't know if they were supposed to be exercising. I can't really remember if there was like, no additional exercise beyond like activities of daily life. I can't remember the exercise piece of it, but I do remember this is like reminiscent of Mean Girls. It was like, we had these like high calorie energy bars and it was like eat 2 of these a day. But otherwise their intake wasn't monitored or controlled. So it was really just like this additive. And I remember as a student in this lab who like, of course, had no input on anything other than like, make sure the spreadsheets are looking like they're supposed to. And I processed urine and blood samples. Those were my jobs. I remember being like, they're probably eating these bars and like not eating other things. Like they're probably compensating for this, but like, I don't remember if that was accounted for. In my memory, it wasn't. It was just like, we're assuming that they're eating this on top of what they're already eating, which is probably what they were supposed to do. But I'm like, I bet they're not doing that. Yeah. And there was a really high dropout rate, unsurprisingly. You had a group of people who needed mental health support and nutrition support. And,
wow.
Again, like I'm not a researcher. I didn't design the study. I had no input whatsoever. And I'm not saying I could have done it better, but I do remember observing and being like, I have some thoughts. So
did you go home and eat the high caloric energy bars or no?
No.
Isn't that funny? You're like, no, I see this. I see how y'all are working the system, but nope, I ain't eating the bar.
Yeah, not eating the bar. No. So yeah, my experience was, again, like trying to kind of like be aware of this cognitive dissonance of like my experiences versus what I was being taught.
Yeah.
Not having a period, not having a healthcare provider really flag that as a bad thing. Instead, I was prescribed birth control, and it was assumed at the time that that was a solution to the problem rather than a Band-Aid over a wound, and got into the profession and was just like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. Like, I think it might actually be harmful to me to keep doing this. And then I'm not sure that it's actually helpful to other people, but tried to find a way that I could practice that felt aligned with like what I thought was going to be health promoting for people. And that's kind of eventually led me to the world of non-diet nutrition and weight inclusive care, and eventually starting a private practice where I specialized in working with menstruating athletes, a couple of college athletes. I was in DC at the time, so a couple of colleges around there. Worked with a couple of runners in college programs, and then also mostly folks who were kind of reckoning with the fact that they wanted to try to get pregnant and hadn't had a period in a really long time. And it was like not a problem until it was,
Right.
So that was my work. And then I met Alexis and we started Lane 9.
So yeah. Talk to me about kind of holding these two spaces here, trying to get my hands here, where on one hand, you're trying to solve these problems for people, and you're also trying to figure out how to kind of navigate these issues yourself.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of us in this space who really are just invested beyond normal, I guess, is because we've experienced a lot of this and we've had to problem solve for ourselves. Like, what was the thing that finally made you kind of be like, I need to figure this out for me, instead of just kind of like, this isn't my job. Like, this is now become very, very personal. I need to figure this out for me.
Yeah. So the first couple of years out of college, my first job was first I had my internship. So for a year after college, I'm in my internship, and I'm at that time just being like, have I made a huge mistake? Like, should I even be a dietitian? I don't know. Yeah. And I was running, I had gotten into like distance running. So I was doing like half marathons. I'm trying to remember if I was taking birth control at the time. I think I kind of went on and off of it during that time because I was worried about my bone health. And I'm like, now that I know what I know, like this doesn't seem good. And so I would like take the pills for a while and then be like, if I go off, I wonder if I'll have a period. Like, I'm trying to eat more, trying to be mindful of like what my body needs. I'm trying to learn about sports nutrition. So for a couple of years, like did the internship, got a job in public health, then got a job in corporate wellness, and was just kind of like trying to figure out my own stuff. I don't know if I can say other words. Trying to figure out my own shit.
Like it's safe space.
Yeah. And was, running with a group in DC and having a great time. I was in my early 20s, like having lots of fun, and was trying to just, focus on myself. At that time, I was not doing work in sports nutrition. I wasn't doing any like one-on-one stuff. I was just like doing my jobs during the day and trying to like have a life outside of work. And then I remember was I 24 yet? I think I was almost 24. But the first time I remember not having a period, I was 18. So had been almost 6 years, and I was training for a marathon, and I must have been taking the pill at the time because I like looked at the calendar and was like, oh shit, like my period week is going to be the week of the race. And I was like, that doesn't feel good. So I think I stopped like 2 months before and was like, we'll just see what happens.
Oh,
and a month later, like got a period for the first time in 6 years.
No
and I was
kidding.
Like, okay, so I'm training for a marathon of all the things. And like, I guess I'm eating enough. And I guess like I've like sort of not figured it out entirely, but like that, I remember that just feeling like, okay, we're on the right track. Like I'm doing what my body needs. If I can be training at this volume for the first time ever,
Right.
and like still get a period. So I remember just being like really proud of that moment. Like, okay, I'm doing a couple of things right. And was still definitely struggling a little bit with disordered eating at the time, but I was like, a lot of things had changed. So that was kind of like the, I don't know, tipping point, I guess, for me with that time. Like I haven't been amenorrheic since. So I was like, yes, I did it.
Well, to me, it's a really almost like a counterintuitive choice to be like, oh, well, I'm going to have my period during a marathon. Let me come off the pill, because my gut sense would have been like, guess who's going continuous through placebo week? Like, that's what I would have done.
I never did that. It like freaked me out to do that. I don't know why. I just like, I'm like, I don't know. I think I should, like your body probably needs to bleed, or I don't know. It like freaked me out to go continuous. So I never did that. Yeah, I'm not saying that was like a logical or even like informed decision.
No, I'm just curious.
Didn't do it.
Because you didn't have one. It's like, were you finally at the point where you're like, okay, I think I might have, maybe I'm eating better? Or like, was there a part of you that like, no, I think I'm doing better. Let me just see.
I don't remember feeling that way. I really, in my memory, it was primarily like, ugh, I don't want to be on my period on race week. So I'm going to go off and just like see what happens.
But that's also like 24-year-old brain too. So there's no logic
100%,
involved.
100%. There was not a lot of logic. Yeah, it would have made more sense to just like skip the placebo week, but I didn't do that. And I mean, in hindsight, I'm glad, because it like gave me this.
We're not giving medical advice, by the way.
Yeah, no, don't do what I'm doing as a 24-year-old for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was 24. And then, fast forward, I think I was 29. No, was I 30? I think I was 30 when I started my private practice. And I had been doing some run coaching on the side, working at a startup. I had started run coaching. So I'd like taken that certification, I think in 2013. And then started working at a startup in 2015 that folded like 16 or 17 months later, and was back in DC. We had moved to California. We were back in DC, and I was like, I'm just going to try like working for myself and see how that goes. And I had my running clients already. So I had like a little cushion to get started. And I was like, I just really, between those 2 years, so the first marathon I ran was 2010 and this is 2016. In that time, I learned a lot about amenorrhea. I'm like, okay, what was going on? Like I learned from the lab, and then I kind of like, did my internship, went to DC, got my jobs, like kind of like put it in the back of my mind for a while, because I was just like, I just want to like be a young adult and like try to enjoy this and get into running and like hope that I can hope I'll be okay. I've somehow never had a bone stress injury. I've never had like a major running injury. So I think I'm like enough of a low key person that I just sort of like skate by. Like I'm not trying to do crazy mileage. I don't run really fast. So I think that has like served me very well. But yeah, between those 6 years, I guess I kind of just kept running, had some life changes that happened, relationships, some moves, etc. And in 2016, because I had been coaching runners and had been a little more focused on like the sports nutrition piece for them, I was like, what would be awesome is if I, in my practice, could work with people who are experiencing amenorrhea. Like that would be really rewarding and come full circle for me. So that's what I did. I had also in that time learned a little bit more about disordered eating and eating disorders, like just didn't learn much about that in my program. Some programs focus on it more than others. So I just had learned a little bit more about that space. Again, had like discovered non-diet nutrition and weight inclusive care. And I was like, I feel like I have a really good tool set that I feel excited to bring into a private practice now. So I'm going to give that a try and see what happens. And that was also, so late 2016, that was also when I met Alexis, and we kind of had this conversation about her experiences in college with what at the time we were kind of still using the female athlete triad. So she was like, your work sort of stood out to me because like I dealt with this in college and no one named it and no one flagged it as a problem. And I'm only starting to make sense of it now. And I was like, that's what happens for a lot of us is like, we go through it. And then a couple years later, we're like, oh, that's what I was experiencing.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I think also too, and I've been talking about history a lot lately. Like I don't think for a very, very long time, it was socially acceptable to even talk about disordered eating. And if you look at your field, I do think that there's people that are like, oh no, I'm not going to work with disordered eating. I'm like, how can you not? And right. And if, nobody's going to admit, back in those days, you have disordered eating issues unless you had total breakdown or things like that. But if we go back and look at, even just reading, I think it was, Kara Goucher's book and Lauren Fleshman's book, there was rampant disordered eating. It made me even go back and look at my high school career and be like, oh, hey, were there people that I worked out with that were navigating that? But I think it was rampant, but people weren't talking about it. And then we get into the late 2010s, and I think we have a lot more people talking about it. Definitely have a lot more people talking about it now. But the last few years, I feel like Red S has really kind of come to the forefront of conversation, especially in my practice, pulling in that lactation piece, which again, it goes back to the low estrogen kind of conversation and so on. Tell us a little bit about how you kind of fell across Reds and kind of what that conversation looks like in your space and both pre and postpartum.
Yeah. So what's coming to mind first that I want to speak to is, I think it was in 2016, maybe 2015, I wrote a blog post that was I struggled with orthorexia. And the number of dietitians who emailed me and were like, I'm so glad you wrote that.
Wow.
It's really rare for people to admit that. And I'm like, I know, that's why. And I'm just someone who I didn't think much of that. I'm like, I want to write about this. I'll put it out there. I'm sure some people will resonate with it. I didn't think maybe I'm not supposed to do this, or maybe we're not supposed to admit this, and I had a few people email me saying, oh, when I was studying nutrition in college, I had an eating disorder, and one of my mentors or a preceptor or advisor or all of the above said, make sure you never admit this because then people won't trust you. And I was like, what? So when I wrote that, it was because I had, again, in that time frame, I had heard the word orthorexia, and I was like, what does that mean? Why didn't I learn about that? And I feel like I'm trying to remember. I think that term was coined in the 90s. It might have even been the late 80s. And it was 2014 when I heard it for the first time. I'm like, how is this possible? And so that kind of helped me make sense of my own experiences. And again, once I put that out there, the people who, not publicly, but in my inbox were like, I struggled with this, or that's why I study nutrition and I'm only now making sense of it. And I'm like, okay, so this is common, but we're not talking about it. That doesn't make sense to me. That's just not how I'm wired. I am wired.
So many parallels about your field and my field. I did not talk about my own issues with leakage and diastasis and prolapse for the longest time, because you're like, oh, are you going to go see somebody that's quote the expert, and then she couldn't prevent their issues. That was very much, I think, that time where you're like, an expert should be able to, you shouldn't have an eating disorder if you're an expert, you would know better, right? Which we all know couldn't be further from the truth.
Could not be further from the truth.
Expert right here, because I experienced it. Can't get any more expert than that.
Yeah. And that's not to say that everyone who works in this field has had this experience, but it is what kind of draws a lot of us to doing this work. So I think, there was one study published a few years ago that it was a survey of dietitians in the US, and the results were up to 80% of dietitians in the US have experienced some form of disordered eating based on the results of this survey. Up to 80% leaves a lot to be interpreted, but I'm like,
that's
80% is a pretty large number,
just a little.
Anywhere you fall under that, it's still a pretty high percentage. So I think it's more common than folks realize. And then, some folks are willing to admit, and I don't want to shame anyone for publicly sharing that story versus not. It's to each their own. But again, the way that I'm wired is just I'm going to share this because maybe someone else has struggled with it, and they are also still making sense of it. And that's the ethos that we brought into Lane 9. I talked to Alexis, and she was just why am I in grad school hearing about the female athlete triad for the first time when I was a female athlete for 15 years? Why is this the first time I'm hearing about it? And so I think that would have been 2016. Again, I think like when we started Lane 9 in 2017, we're like, oh, it seems like people are using reds now. So we'll use reds. Like that seems to be the term, like definitely lagging behind like the norms in the field, right? I think it was 2013 that reds was coined to try to.
Yeah. I mean, like now it's like, everybody knows about it. Whereas then it was like this new, like, what does that exactly mean? Is that female athlete triad? Like, it was nuanced, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And, to like house the female athlete triad, but also acknowledge that like there are more symptoms than just those three things. It might present in different ways. It presents across the sex spectrum, et cetera. So we started it and wanted to share our stories to try to help other athletes make sense of it. Like if you're not seeing this, if you're not reading it, if you're not hearing about it, you don't have a way to make sense of your own story. And, we wanted people to see it in writing and read a story about someone that had experienced it from like lots of different levels and angles. Like we try to be one thing I think we try to bring to the front a lot is like, this is from athletes at all levels. This is not just collegiate athletes. It's not just high school athletes. It's not just professional athletes. Like it happens across levels of sport. And I was never a competitive runner. And, I experienced this before I even really got into running, and then running like probably didn't help, like my body was already in a low energy availability state. So then depleting it further with running was not helping. So we just wanted people to, have a space where they could talk about it, where they, again, could make sense of their own experiences, in a space where they didn't feel like it was taboo to bring up your period or amenorrhea or disordered eating or a bone stress injury or whatever it was.
Right. Well, I think for some people too, it's, there's probably sort of a progression in how they wrap their head around this is, how do you wrap your head around the fact that you're navigating an eating disorder? How do you reconcile the fact that you're just a recreational runner? Maybe you don't consider yourself, quote, an athlete. Would you even consider something like energy deficiency and make that connection? How would you even make that connection to a bone stress injury? Like, have you found there's kind of a typical pathway when somebody's kind of learning about this stuff that you've tried to, support with Lane 9?
I find, most people who come across Lane 9, this was true in the earlier days. I think now it's probably more just that it's a little more common to see it on social media. But when we started it, I think people were Googling, like, I'm not getting a period, what's going on? Or, what is amenorrhea? And we had like a free WordPress at the time. So we were not like tracking Google Analytics, but from what we know from people emailing us and like leaving comments on the blog posts and stuff was like, I hadn't heard of this, but I was like trying to figure out what was going on with my body. And like, I found you and I found this story. And again, when we started it, what ended up happening, this was like not our plan. I don't think we could have even like tried to plan this, but what ended up happening was we shared personal essays and like just detailing kind of our own experiences. And then folks responded by saying, I have a story. I want to share my story. And we were like, oh, okay, yeah, that'd be great. Like we'll pull in lots of different stories. Initially I think we were just like, we'll put our stories out there and we'll like see what happens. Like we did not have a plan. There was not a plan. Well, the initial plan was let's put our stories out there and also let's start trying to talk to as many physicians as possible. That was our like very loose idea, because we all, like, there were three of us at the time, and we were like, how is it possible that like the three of us who grew up in different areas of the country and played different sports and went to different colleges, like not a one encountered a physician who was like, no period, that's probably not good.
Right.
So that was our first few conversations were around like, how can we connect with more physicians just to help them understand, like maybe you've never, like you have come across this. To your point earlier, a lot of dietitians want to keep eating disorders like over here, and they don't want to have to work. They don't want to work with eating disorders. They don't want to learn about them. And I'm like, whether you get the training or not, whether you think you're working with eating disorders or not, you are.
Right.
They come into your practice. You just maybe are not recognizing that because you're kind of trying to avoid it. But, especially if you work with athletes, it's like, I think the latest research or one of the studies recently was like 1 in 4 collegiate athletes experiences symptoms of an eating disorder. Yeah. 1 in 4. And that's probably lower than what is actually true.
Well, there was one recently looking at eating disorders in masters athletes, like even if you had them address like the likelihood of it coming back and kind of rearing its head or them still having eating. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. I didn't see that study, but like,
but like, it's still, this is a lifelong thing. And again, not having navigated this personally, but navigating other issues, like it's very seldom that things are like one and done and you've taken care of it. Like, especially with, all sorts of different variables involved in it. But like, I think that's such a bigger conversation too, is like, this isn't just a high school kid issue. This isn't just a college kid issue. This isn't just, hey, I'm in my 20s and I'm running issue. Like, this is stuff that we need to navigate through the different seasons of our lives. So for you, like when you're trying to navigate, I want to be a mom, at that point were your periods like pretty good and you were feeling good about things? And then as you're going into pregnancy where you need weight gain, I would imagine like certain levels of body dysphoria and things like that might kind of poke their heads in or a little bit. Like, what was that experience like as you're trying to navigate this as a first-time mom, but also as a professional and also having navigated kind of these issues for yourself?
Yeah. So, interestingly, I learned a lot about amenorrhea when I was in the lab and then, kind of like trying to understand my own experiences and what was going on in my body before I started working with other people. And then when I was like, I want to be pregnant, I'm like, how do I know so little about the menstrual cycle? Like, what?
All of us said so every first time mom ever, where you're just like, wait, mucus? What the frick is that? Like,
yeah. So I got pregnant in early 2017, which was also when, again, I was like growing my private practice and we had started Lay 9. So there was a lot going on. I didn't think through all the ramifications of being pregnant and having a newborn and also trying to grow a business. Didn't think. But I mean, at the time, like I knew my cycles were regular. I was learning more about ovulation windows and what to look for, things like that. And I just remember going into my first pregnancy feeling like, wow, I'm really glad that I'm in the place that I'm in now versus like if I had tried to do this a few years ago and was still sort of struggling with like food and movement and trying to, kind of like untangle lots of disordered thoughts and behaviors and falling back to old coping mechanisms when things got very stressful. Like, I did a lot of work, like therapy and like kind of my own nutrition work and trying to like find a balance with running and training and being really on top of like tracking cycles to make sure like, oh, was that one a little bit longer? Does that mean like I wasn't fueling enough? So I think I came into the first pregnancy just like, I'm glad I've done some work because this is hard. It is hard when your body is changing. And, I got pregnant, I think at the end of April, maybe early May. And like, was pregnant over the summer and just did not feel good running. Like it was just, we were in DC. It's so hot. It's so humid.
Summer running's awful.
It's awful. And I was like concerned that my heart rate was getting too high. I mean, I didn't know I like actually knew nothing about exercise and pregnancy. And so I was just like, I don't know. I feel like running is maybe not the best thing for me right now. I was leaking a ton. I remember going to an OB appointment and I was like, well, I tried to go for this run and I was probably still in my first trimester, maybe second, I don't know. And I was like, I tried to go for this run and like my shorts were soaked. And I'm like, is that amniotic fluid? And they were like, no, it's incontinence. And I was like, oh, okay.
And they didn't refer you?
Carrie, come on.
We'll have an offline conversation about which practice that was. But again, like it also we'll give you credit. Like it was, the late 2010s. So
This is 2017. They were not referring me to a pelvic floor PT. I mean, fast forward to my 6-week like postpartum appointment. And I met with this who I'd previously thought to be very lovely male OB that I actually liked. I otherwise like strongly have a preference for female providers, but I'm like, this guy, he's all right. I'll take him. He's fine. And he had been in the hospital when my kiddo was born. So I was like kind of glad that I had my postpartum appointment with him. And I said, my preferred form of movement is running. And I just feel like there's probably a lot of things I need to figure out before I like start running again. He's like, no, you're good. Like exercise, you're good. And I was like, I know, but running. And he was like, no, everything's good. And I was like,
where'd you deliver?
I was like, can I have a referral to a pelvic floor PT? I didn't know if I needed one for my health insurance, but I was like, just in case I'm here. Like,
yeah.
And he goes, why? What happened?
Oh, Jesus.
I was like, what happened? A person came out of my body. Like, what do you mean? What happened? So that was my experience. Obviously, I did not leave it at that.
Which hospital did you deliver at?
I delivered at Sibley with my first. Okay. And I do not remember the name of the practice. It was like they had an office in Farragut North, Falls Church, and Bethesda. So there's of the like huge. Just like you see a different person every time. But which again, I was like, I saw him in the hospital, and I'm glad that I happened to have him for my postpartum appointment, because at least it's the same face. But
this is the thing that, like, not to divert away from, all the dietitian talk, but like all the major hospitals in this area have pelvic floor practices. Whether or not they have running. Oh yeah. Sibley has a pelvic floor practice.
Yeah. Nobody told me that. So.
Yeah. No. And I think that's the part that just like, I'm sure we can find all the parallels in the world, is like all this stuff exists. Now, whether you have run specific or things like that, I don't know that. I mean, I didn't really start to get super run specific until the last couple of years, but like, all these resources were available, and yet we still have this gatekeeping. And I'm sure it's the same thing with you guys. It's like, well, why do you need a dietitian? Why do you
just eat more, or just eat healthy? Yeah. Okay. I mean,
I didn't. Because that'll fix it, right?
Yeah. Right. It's like, even if I wasn't a runner, like pelvic floor PT was helpful to me after all of my kids. Like, regardless of what form of movement you want to be doing, your body has been through a lot. So how is this not like standard care? I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir. I
know, but like, I think, and again, I think there's so many parallels between our two fields. Is like, you would, if somebody had an ACL injury, you would send them to rehab, like, and it's like, it's that particular, and it's shifting a lot now, which is great. But like, I wonder if you're actually like, do you ever get referrals from OBGYNs?
No. And I mean, to be honest, one, I don't really see clients anymore, but when I was seeing like if I work with a client now, it's somebody that I'm coaching for running, and I'm like, well, yeah, we can do both, because
I see what I mean though? Like, they weren't referring to us because they're like, oh, you're 6 weeks, you're totally fine, because they don't understand that whole musculoskeletal aspect, because they're in their silo. They're going to be the person that, if you're going to tell somebody, I don't have a period, it's going to be them.
Right.
Wouldn't they be the primary? And so again, I'm not bashing OBGYNs at all, because they do a lot of things. But I think as a consumer, as a person, being very aware of the knowledge base expected of that provider and the educational basis that they have. Like, they probably, I mean, if they had a lecture on amenorrhea, it was probably like 30 seconds long. And didn't mention the word dietitian at all, just like they didn't mention, I mean, and again, it's better now, but like, so unless we change the medical system, and that's going to be a big ship to move, and it's going to move slowly, I think, again, this is where, you come back to getting good information out to the public and social media and things like that. Like, you need to understand what your provider can and cannot do, and where their knowledge base is. Maybe they can't fix the amenorrhea, but they should be able to. If you ask them a referral, they better tell you, we need to have a dietitian consult. Just like if I'm peeing my pants in pregnancy or postpartum, we have this person. I can't tell you why or what they do, or like, and I think that's a big assumption. I remember very, very early on in my career, is like, I thought physicians had all the answers. And if I didn't get somebody better, they would know that I was a shitty therapist, and because they knew how to do all the things, which that couldn't be further from the truth. But they should be able to at least refer out and be like, hey, you're not getting a period, or, you potentially might be at risk for this. You should see a dietitian, just like they should be referring out to us. So
Yeah.
Sorry, totally went off the rails. We'll come back around. But I was like, no, there's so many parallels here about getting access to the right person.
Right. I will say there was one client during my, how many years? Maybe 4 years that I was in DC in private practice before we moved to Colorado. One client who was amenorrheic, was a runner, wanted to get pregnant, and her OB was like, maybe see a dietitian before we try anything else. I was like, not me specifically, but just like look for a dietitian.
Yeah, but just see someone. Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God. It happened once. just the one time.
But again, I think that's such a good point for people to understand, is that we're still coming around on this.
Yeah.
It's not, and I think where I'm struggling as a provider, when I have somebody that maybe has an eating disorder history that somehow they've divulged, fortunately, because we've developed a good relationship, but they're going back to running, they're lactating. How do we navigate that piece and me not scare the crap out of them? And I think we're still working on that. And like, how do you know what eating enough is when you're breastfeeding and trying to get, and we don't have any quantification of that right now. So how do you kind of navigate that piece of it, or how do you kind of approach it when you have somebody? First of all, how do you identify that risk? And then second of all, how do you figure out what's going to work for them, especially in a period of time when they naturally are not getting a cycle and we don't know when it's coming back?
Oh, that's so tough. Yeah. So from a dietitian standpoint, like how would I navigate lactating and running and postpartum recovery? Yeah, it is tough. I mean, everybody is different. Like my periods came back really early. #blessed. I was like, what the hell?
I know. It's cruel.
It's cruel. And then they're irregular for a little while. So like you don't have a lot of feedback to go off of, and you're sleep deprived and you can't remember things and blah, blah, blah. So I mean, I think with lactation, what a lot of people are unprepared for, especially if they're active, is how hungry they're going to be.
Right.
Like it is, in some cases, it can feel like an insatiable hunger. And you have layered on top of all of this, you have the culture of you should be quote unquote losing your baby weight and quote unquote bouncing back. And I think even the most emotionally evolved of us like get into that space and are like, oh wait, my body does feel really different and it's uncomfortable. And I don't know how to like make sense of that, and I'm struggling because everything is new, especially if it's your first kid. Like suddenly I'm a parent and suddenly I hardly sleep at all. And my body feels sore and tired and my nipples are raw. And it's just like, there's so much going on. I mean, when I was working with folks in that space, I think we talked a lot about just hunger and satisfaction, fueling regularly, eating even if you're not feeling that hungry, it's kind of like a lot of the same principles that apply to sports nutrition for most people. Like you may not be hungry when you wake up early for a run, but that doesn't mean your body won't benefit from having fuel, and you may not be hungry every 2 to 3 hours while you're nursing a newborn, but I can tell you that it's going to help, and it's going to help you feel better, help your milk supply, help your body recovering if you are well nourished. And, I think a lot of people in those first like 12 weeks, especially, it's just everything is thrown for a loop. Like everything feels not normal and not
right.
I mean, in most cases, like it doesn't feel great. And so then to have to also think constantly about like, what am I eating? Am I eating enough? It was, in my experience, mostly trying to help people get into a place where they were eating really frequently, hydrating, understanding that, if you're active, having some electrolyte mix during the day is going to be helpful, not just water. Again, eating frequently, eating balanced meals that have all 3 macronutrients that you need, and not just, prioritizing one over the other. And kind of like making peace with that hunger. Because I think a lot of people, again, in my experience, especially if you've come into this with a even slightly disordered relationship with food, like eating as much as you probably need to eat to maintain lactating and movement is a lot.
It's going to be hard.
Yeah, it's like an emotional load. It's a mental load, one, just to think through like, what should I eat next? I don't know. Like, I remember getting to places where I'm just like, I'm sick of everything, but I know I need to eat, and just being like, I don't know, just like throw a bunch of stuff in a smoothie or something.
Yeah. Well, I think that the take home point there is it's not a time for calorie deficit.
Oh gosh, no.
And that's whether it's because I put a safe space here or not, but that's one of the things that like inevitably comes out of people's mouths in those first couple months postpartum is they have expectations. And of course you have those people that go home in their pre-pregnancy jeans, and then they have, then others that not, and they have this expectation that they're going not only back, but look better than they did before. They're like, well, why is my belly round? I'm like, was it ever flat? I'm like, no. I'm like, well, don't expect it here. Like, but to navigate that piece of it, and then, then the nudges from family or friends being like, well, you should have lost that weight by now. Even though you're logically like, no, I'm trying to fuel my kid. I'm trying to do all this stuff. But, I think people are cool with it the first maybe 2 to 3 months. And then after that, like around that back to work time, which is around when you're trying to fit into your old clothes to go back to work. If they don't fit, I think that pressure goes on.
Yeah. And again, like there's just so much happening mentally for a parent around that time. Like
the hormones.
The hormones, babies change. I always say to like parents, I'm like, as soon as you get used to a routine with a baby, it changes. They change every couple of weeks, like whatever their nap schedule or their feeding schedule, like it's going to change. As soon as you get used to it, it's different. And that's really hard. I feel like, the clientele that I specialized in working with for a long time was like, and we talk about this on the Lane 9 podcast too, like the things that can lend themselves to being a very accomplished athlete are some of the same risk factors for disordered eating and eating disorders. And then you layer parenting on top of all of that. And it's like, you have control over very little, if anything. And it's really hard to navigate that. And then, that's to say nothing of like relationship dynamics that might change, or household dynamics that might change if you already have a kid or pets or other people that you take care of. It's just like, there's so much going on that I completely see how movement and food become the things that you want to control or that are your outlet. And it's really hard to try to develop a new coping skill when everything else is new,
No, I think that's fair. I love it when I can always tell when people have more than one kid or their kids are older and they've survived a little. How old are your kids?
7, 5, and almost 4.
Yeah. Okay. So, it's just like, there's just something for those of you that like, either you're navigating babies or pregnancy right now. Like we don't mean to be like, well, there's just, but like, I think when you've been through enough freaking seasons and you're just like, it's a shit show. I'm sorry. It just is. And you figure it out. And there's some, like, I get daily reminders with patients. They're like, my kid just turned 2 and he's an asshole. I'm like, yeah, he is. And he's going to be even worse in a year and a half. But during those moments, like you forget how utterly emotionally draining and hard, and you just want to sleep, and you're just like, I don't want to be thinking about food. I just want to go for a run, or I just want to do this, or I just want to get back in my body again because this is not who I am. Like you forget that just like visceralness, that everything is just incredibly heightened. So we can sit here and have these logical conversations, but when you're in that, and that's why you need to delegate that out and get somebody who can step back objectively and help you sort of navigate, whether it's from, counseling perspective, dietitian perspective, physio, like, because when you are in it, you cannot make these logical kind of decisions, I don't think.
No. Yeah. It's a like under-resourced brain and body because you're, like mentally and physically, from a hormonal and like kind of evolutional perspective, like focused on baby. Yeah. Like that's how like birthing parents' brain and body are wired, is like keep baby alive, like our second and third are very close together, which was not the intention, but my periods come back early. So, here we are. I remember when our third was a newborn and our middle was like, 13, 14 months old. And he was just like a curious kid. He was exploring, he was crawling and climbing and doing all those things, a lot of things that our first just didn't do. And I just like could not, there was one day where I like was in the backyard with them and my husband was there and I just like couldn't deal with the injury risk. Like I just was like so focused on our middle. I'm like, he's going to hit his head on that. He's going to scratch his leg on that. He's going to, and I remember Mike just being like, maybe take the baby inside and just take a little break. Like just maybe, do you want to go sit on the couch? Do you want to go for a walk? Like what would help you in this moment? And then I remember talking to my therapist about it. And she was like, you are in a hypervigilant state. And you are focused on what your brain is trying to do is keep baby alive. But what you're redirecting that to is a toddler, and toddlers and babies are very different. So I appreciated just having that perspective. But as you were saying, kind of like what is going to be helpful and supportive to most new parents is also like, these are things that not a lot of people have access to or resources to maintain. And it just speaks to like how in the US under-resourced a lot of us are in that time frame. Not intentionally, like it's just the way that our culture is set up. Like you go back to work at 12 weeks. What? At 12 weeks, like it's, if you've been through it, and I'm sure most people listening have been through it, like that's a wild transition when you go from like the fourth trimester into like babyhood. A lot of things are changing. And I feel like for me at that point, it was always like the sleep deprivation has caught up to me. Like I could maybe skate by for a couple, maybe like 10 or 12 weeks. And then I'm like, oh, I'm tired. Like now I'm realizing how tired I am. And that's also like at that time, you're supposed to like get back into everything, it just doesn't, the math does not math.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, it just goes to kind of speak to what we're talking about is like, again, it depends on that season you're in. You got to know the history of like what you might be susceptible to going in, but knowing that where your vulnerabilities are going to be, and your brain is going to be wired to behave in a certain way, which might make it play out differently than you expected. And just, I talk about this portal where I'm like, you can logically prepare for all this. So if you're pregnant and listening to this, you'll be like, totally. I got you.
I will remember this.
Right. Exactly. You don't. But once you walk through the portal, like all of a sudden, everything we just said hits completely differently. And there's like multiple sub portals. Like I only walked through the first and the second. We decided not to walk into and have a third. But like I was talking to a patient yesterday where I was like, yeah, you think you remember everything from the first. And then it's not until you have the second that all of a sudden you're like, no, that doesn't go there. And this is how we did this. And like it all just comes back. There's like the amnesia that sort of kicks in, or the not knowing. But and again, it's such a hard time too. Again, if you're used to navigating your issues via your menstrual cycle, you don't have that piece of information to rely on. I always, and there's always the misnomers about that. Like that's a PSA I give to every single new mom. I'm like, look, here's the thing. You can get pregnant without your period. You can get pregnant while you're lactating. You can be lactating and not get your period. You can get your period and be like you can get pregnant.
Yes.
PSA,
it does happen.
If A goes into B, you can get C, like pretty much whenever. Because
I mean, if you're in a heterosexual relationship, if your partner's sex does not match your sex, these things can happen. Take precautions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. On that note, we'll run back. At the end of every episode, I ask a couple of questions. What's a book you're reading or podcast you're listening to right now?
Well, I just started All Fours. Hadn't read it.
What's that?
Have not read it yet. Oh, it's how do I describe this book? I mean, I'm only like 3 chapters in, so I don't know if I'm the right person to try to give a summary, but it's about perimenopause and sexuality and kind of like changing.
Oh, who wrote that one?
Miranda July.
Okay.
It came out in 2024.
Okay. There's so many books that I need to go on a long run and put it on like audiobook and double speed.
Yeah. Well, I just started reading that.
Okay. Good or not good so far?
I like it so far. Yeah.
Okay.
People have like very hot takes on it. So I'll be curious if when folks listen to this, what they thought about it.
Back. Okay, cool. All right. Favorite activity since becoming a mom? It doesn't have to do with your kids either if you don't want it to.
Okay. I mean, running was just the first thing that came to mind. Like running is still a big part of my life. So yeah, running, I guess.
One piece of advice for moms, doesn't matter if they're new or experienced or.
Lean on your people and like let people help you.
I like that. All right. I have an added challenge to this. I was going to say, who's someone in your space that we should know about? But you get extra bonus points if I don't know them yet.
Someone in my space, meaning reds and athletics and
all the things.
Nutrition. Yep. Ooh, oh gosh, this is hard. With someone in
you can
space.
Answer with somebody that we know together mutually, but like extra bonus points if I don't know them.
I'm gonna give Mel a shout out. We were talking about Mel earlier. Yes! So she's friend of mine.
A lovely story right now. Mel Silver, who goes, her handle is Nutrition by Mel, and she just had her little daughter, and she's graciously been sharing a lot of insight with her early postpartum journey. Ups and downs, all that good stuff. She's a delightful human. Give her a follow for sure. But she's a better woman than I, because you would not find me on the socials during this.
Yeah, it took me 3 kids to take a full break from email and social media. I was like, you will not be hearing from me for at least a month. At least. Nope. Goodbye. So
not at all.
But yeah, Mel, I mean, if you tagging on to my previous answer, like lean on your people and let people help you. Like if you need a dietitian, Mel is your girl. Mel's your person.
No, she's such a good human. All right. And then last one here. What does it mean to you to be an active mom?
Right now, it means letting myself get back into letting things be hard again. That might sound a little weird. Yeah, I feel like, everyone approaches postpartum activity very differently. If you spend 5 minutes on social media, you'll see 5 different examples of how someone has approached their movement postpartum, whether that's like leaning really hard into strength or getting right back into running and then having to back off and then getting in again, maybe training for a marathon, maybe everyone like does it so differently. And I found for me that kind of staying in a space where it felt fun, but not too hard.
Yeah.
And where I could do like some long distances, but not too long. Like that felt good for a really long time. And I don't want to say that without adding that, like, I struggled with that a little bit. Yeah. Will I ever want to run a marathon again? Because I really don't want to right now. It sounds too hard. Will I ever want to run, quote unquote fast again? Like, I don't know. It sounds too hard. And for me, I mean, you heard my kids are young and they're close together. Like I had enough hard. There was enough of it and I didn't want more. And that was just what was true for me. So right now, what I'm finding to be true for me as an active mom is that feels like a fun space to start exploring a little bit again with goals and challenges and letting it be hard, but also fun.
You're at a lovely, poignant point. At least it was very similar for me. When my daughter ended up in like full day preschool before kindergarten at our public school opened up a lot. And that's honestly when I started my practice here. And then it was a couple years into that where I'm like, hey, I'm ready to kind of branch out and do my first half or this or that and so on. And so you're at a point where you're like, okay, no one's dead. I can
and they're in school.
And they're in school. And, unfortunately, then you still get up at 0 dark 30 to get everything done. But like, you finally can kind of like shift back to yourself a little bit or kind of just, and I think kind of just to give you some foreshadowing, it lets you kind of re-examine what you thought you could do at this point or this age or this stage and allows you to kind of redefine it for yourself. So it's really fun. And I think just being in this community, I think there's a lot of support to getting stronger, more capable, whatever that looks like. It doesn't necessarily have to mean PRs, but like more than you thought you probably could be in whatever that looks like for you. So it's exciting. So congrats on keeping everybody alive this long.
Doing what we can over here. Yeah.
Woo, we did it. All right. If you want to find out more about Heather and Lane 9, you can find her over on Instagram, Lane 9 Project, and also Heather CRD. Heather, thank you so much for joining me on the show. Next time you're back in Arlington, we'll visit the old neighborhood.
The old stomping grounds. Yes.
Yeah. And then we'll go offline and you can tell me who your OBGYN was.
Okay. Trying to remember.
Thanks so much. Well, okay. Well, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah. Thank you.
If you're navigating pregnancy, postpartum, or perimenopause, whether personally or professionally, check out all our free resources and upcoming courses at carriepagliano.com. This podcast reflects the opinions of Dr. Carrie Pagliano and her guests, and it is for entertainment purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. Always consult your healthcare provider with any medical questions. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. And thanks for listening.